A question from James. The US Supreme Court has recently ruled that it is unlawful to fire a person because they're gay, lesbian, or trans, a narrow but important victory. As LGBT Floridians are currently not protected from discrimination in the workplace or in public accommodation, do you think the Supreme Court ruling will have an impact on the Republican-controlled Florida legislature? And what will you do to advance legislation that will end this discrimination?
So the great thing about that decision, and I know a lot of people are freaking out now, trying to make sure that people don't overestimate the power of this Supreme Court decision, right? I grew up in Miami that was not very kind to openly LGBT individuals at the turn of the century, and it's why I left to Boston. I remember back then Googling, LGBT or gay safe places, and Boston was ranked one of the highest. And so that inevitably led to part of my reason to go there, although I didn't come out until my junior year. And actually, Laura DeVoe, who's on here, was my beacon of hope that turned me over to the Boston Gay Men's Chorus, where I came out of the closet and became more confident and comfortable in who I was. And I thank them for it, and I'll start tearing up if I talk more about that. But what you need to know in Florida, just last session, there was 4 bills that Republicans brought up to try and challenge LGBT protections and rights. We had a trans bathroom bill that tried to make it through the state legislature. It actually originated from the Republican that held this state house seat back in 2016. We had a bill making it illegal for medical professionals to provide assistance to trans youth, that made it on to the legislators' desks. Thankfully, one of my Democratic colleagues has a trans daughter and gave a very emotional speech on the House floor that got emotional reactions from even the hardest Republicans. And so it shouldn't take allies having to go through those lengths to defeat these bills in the state legislature. And I tell my friends, and I tell my colleagues, and I tell my coworkers that representation matters, right? Seeing me sitting next to them, being an openly LGBT individual matters. Right now, if we did not elect another LGBT person into the state legislature, we would have only 2 representatives in a House of 120 members. And currently we have no LGBTQ individuals in the state Senate. And so you can imagine that representation matters a lot. And I say that because this decision by the Supreme Court does protect gay, lesbian, queer, and transgender members of our communities from discrimination based on sex and gender representation. But that doesn't mean that it's going to equally cover everyone in every state. And so what we know is, and in the women's rights movement, we've seen a lot of conversations around that as well, right? While women are protected, have they really been protected? And so the same thing can be said and understood about the LGBT community. So while there might be more of a covert attempt at some of this, one of them, and the one that you all might have read about, is the religious exemption to all of these protections. And that's something that we are going to have to litigate, right? And that's something that the Supreme Court decision made a point to say that they were not responding to, because it wasn't a part of that particular case. But there is another case before the Supreme Court that talks about religious exception. And we're going to have to continue to litigate that, and we're going to have to continue protecting our LGBT members of our community, especially on something like conversion therapy, right? Where you have bans not just on religious spaces, but then you also have language in a lot of these bills that says that conversion therapy cannot be performed by anyone other than a physician or an in-house professional, but allows in that reading of the text religious professionals and not just health professionals. And so that's the loophole as well that they found with something like conversion therapy. And so we have to, again, work on all these smaller things. Yes, it's a huge win. Yes, a lot in the community that's been fighting for this for a very long time is saying, pump on the brakes, don't celebrate too hard because there's still a lot of work to do. And so there's a happy medium there. But again, none of that happy medium even happens if you don't have representation to fight for it.